Welcome back again to Last Week I Watched. I'm Mark, and I watch and review movies and TV shows to help you decide whether or not they're worth your time or not. So last week I watched WeCrashed, The White Queen, Black Crab, Good Time, Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows, and Windfall. So let's talk about them. First up is WeCrashed. It's from 2022. It stars Jared Leto, Anne Hathaway, Kyle Marvin. It's showing on Apple. So this is a mini-series. It's about the greed-filled rise and inevitable fall of WeWork. It was valued as one of the world's most valuable startups, and the narcissist whose chaotic behaviour made it all possible. So Adam Newman, played by Jared Leto, and Rebecca Newman, played by Anne Hathaway, they found WeWork. It's a co-working share company that provides casual working spaces. As they pursue massive growth, growing the business to a unicorn valuation of $47 million, their egos start to get in the way, and the business is hemorrhaging ludicrous amounts of money on an almost daily basis. When they're pushed towards a public IPO, the truth finally starts to come to light, and Adam is forced out of the company as the valuation crashes. It's quite fascinating that Adam creates what is essentially a real estate business renting office space, but somehow manages to package it in the veneer of a tech company. It's all sort of the ludicrous promises, the things about, inspiring global change and things like that you sort of got from Silicon Valley, but in real. And that's just, it's bizarre. It's almost culty at sometimes, in some ways, and it's just the strangest thing I've ever seen. He's exceedingly good at bullshitting his way into spending other people's money, often playing on their greed so that they're thinking they're all hyped up that they're going to see unbelievable returns somewhere in the future. Unfortunately, the model he's running isn't ever going to happen, and the whole thing is just a house of cards. He's essentially renting a lot of property at rates where he isn't then earning enough money back from people to sort of even cover that. So it's just constantly hemorrhaging money. And it just shows really how the rich live in a completely disconnected reality from everyone else's lives, where we somehow have to actually pay for things. They can just keep on borrowing limitless amounts of money on, the promise that somewhere down the road it's going to return into massive amounts of money. So he just creates all this chaos and sort of unfairly still walks away with millions of dollars after it all collapses. Rebecca initially seems to be responsible for feeding his ego solely, but when he becomes a monster, she's then resentful that she isn't getting the same recognition and respect, and this inspires her to go on her own spiritual ego trip, pushing the line that the company's goal is to elevate the world's consciousness, a ridiculous claim from an office co-working company. She goes on to form WeGrow, her own sort of new age spiritual hippy-dippy school, with the goal of raising the next generation of entitled narcissists. It too ultimately collapses, but in that case it's probably for the better. Really, it's a portrait of two narcissists feeding each other's egos and the chaos and destruction it creates on the lives of the people that did the actual work to build the company. The Newmans are nothing to be admired, I think. In fact, they're actually quite ludicrous, and it's really a lesson in how late-stage capitalism has gotten way out of control. I definitely recommend checking out. It's quite fascinating. Okay, so next up is The White Queen. It's from 2013, stars Rebecca Ferguson, Max Irons, James Frain. It's showing on Netflix. So this is a British historical drama. It's based on the War of the Roses, and it follows the women involved in the long conflict for the throne of England. It starts in 1464 with the country at war for 9 years, fighting over who was the rightful king as two sides of the same family, the House of York versus the House of Lancaster, contest the throne. And the story follows three women, Elizabeth Woodville, Margaret Beaufort, and Anne Neville, who manipulate the events behind the scenes to gain power. The usual sort of power behind the throne. As always, the BBC creates some impressive period dramas. Nobody does it better, really. And elements of the War of the Roses, in this case, were also used in Game of Thrones, which is kind of interesting. So there are some similarities, although I find Game of Thrones a better story, although it's more of a fantasy story. But this is more of a true-to-life story. It's not to say say it's boring. There is certainly plenty of scummy behaviour and just total bastardry on display. But I did find the story quite complicated and difficult to keep track of all the characters and their motivations. And it does take a few episodes to get to grips with it all. And they're constantly adding more characters as, you know, people have God knows how many children as they're desperately trying to assure their ascension to the throne. There's also quite a number of well-known actors in here, and they do an excellent job. I noticed quite a few from Game of Thrones, which was fun also. We made quite a game out of connecting the actors to their Thrones characters. This is a single season of 10 episodes, although there was talk of a follow-up series called The Spanish Princess. I don't know whether that's happened or not. I'll keep an eye out for it. But the series was based on Philippa Gregorio's historical novel series, The Cousins' War. The subsequent series would focus on Catherine of Aragon. One thing I can say about this series though is it sent me scurrying to Wikipedia to find out more about some of the characters and how the family were all connected to each other and I guess how things historically went. So if you have an historical interest in the royal family, this will probably be up your alley. It's quite interesting if only for the realization that people are a bunch of bastards even hundreds of years ago, and as terrible as things can be in modern times, they're probably just as bad back then. We certainly didn't invent bad behaviour. Check it out. Okay, next up was Black Crab. It's from 2022, starring Noomi Rapace, David Densick and Elliot Opheim, showing on Netflix. This is a Swedish film, so subtitles are required. Ed, played by Noomi Rapace, she's drafted into a mission that she is told will end an ongoing civil war that's broken out. She's been selected to be part of a team that must transport some packages under cover of darkness and across the frozen archipelago on skates. If the packages are delivered to a research base, it will apparently end the war. As they face challenges in reaching the base, they stumble onto a more serious ethical challenge after opening the packages. It's an interesting premise, sneaking a package through enemy lines, but it's strange that there is never any context given to the Civil War. You never know who or why or even what's going on. You just get random encounters with enemy soldiers as they journey across the archipelago. The director said he purposely didn't want to explain any backstory or create any distraction in the story, but it just feels a little strange to not have any kind of explanation. I suppose it does create a feeling of disorientation in the story though, since you're not really sure what's going on or who to trust, and it keeps the focus on this group rather than any sort of wider political implications. Ultimately, the story chooses to focus on the ethical conundrum. Would you end the war overnight even if it risks ending everything? Personally, I don't think it was much of a solution, since chemical or biological weapons are too indiscriminate. They just can't target just the foe, and risking killing your own people is probably not worth doing it. When the remaining members of this group are faced with the choice, they split into two camps, and the story focuses on that choice in the third act. There's some criticism that the third act was a letdown, and perhaps they were looking for more an action and explosion type of ending rather than an ethical conundrum. Personally, I think Ed made the right choice, and even if her choice was only coloured by the desire to give her missing daughter a chance, it's still the right thing to do. Ed is very well written and should be added to the pantheon of strong female characters. She just gets on with the mission, she does what needs to be done, even at the expense to herself, and Noomi Rapace does a great job, and I've always been very impressed with her since the original Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy. The other real standout is the cinematography. There are some stunning scenes of them crossing the frozen sea at night. There's also some really good action scenes, and the sniper scene is a particular standout, where they're being shot at night and they're basically stranded out on the ice, and you're just not really sure where it's coming from. It is a pretty tense scene. I had a good time with the movie, but I can understand why people might be a little let down by the ending. It doesn't give you an explosive war-ending revelation, but instead confronts you with a choice and the outcome of the choice. Even if it doesn't wrap up the war in a nice bow, it's certainly worth a look. Check it out. Okay, next up was Good Time. It's from 2017. It stars Robert Pattinson, Benny Safdie, and Jennifer Jason Leigh, and it's showing on Netflix. So after a botched robbery, Connie Nicaise, played by Robert Pattinson, and his mentally disabled brother Nick, played by Benny Safdie. Nick lands in prison and Connie embarks on a twisted journey through New York's underworld to try to free him. Robert Pattinson does a really great job here as the well-meaning Connie, but he's ultimately a deeply flawed character. Apparently he so impressed Matt Reeves with his role that the Batman was written specifically for him. While he genuinely cares for Nick, he really can't look after himself, let alone another person, and every attempt he makes to get the money to bail Nick out lands him in a worse situation. As he frantically stumbles into more trouble, he encounters more unsavory characters. He ultimately comes to realize that he can't undo this, and the best way to help Nick is to finally take some responsibility and just get out of Nick's way. It's a genuinely tense film. It moves urgently throughout the night. New York is masterfully shot, and it's sort of really gritty and grimy. It's quite an oppressive character, I think, in itself, but it's not necessarily the cause of the problems Connie finds himself in. That's, I think, all down largely to his poor choices. It's also interesting that the film was shot in public spaces, and many of the extras are in fact members of the public. Pattinson apparently disappeared completely into the role so completely that he was unrecognised by people on the street. While it's definitely not a good time for the Nickes brothers or anyone they encounter, I had a good time with this crime thriller, and Pattinson really impressed me. He definitely shows he's much better than Twilight would have you believe, so definitely give it a watch, check it out. Next up was Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows. It's from 2011. It stars Robert Downey Jr., Jude Law and Jared Harris, and this was showing on Netflix. This is the second of the Sherlock Holmes films with Robert Downey Jr. And in this one, Sherlock Holmes, played by RDJ, is on the trail of Professor Moriarty, played by Jared Harris, and he's conducted a string of crimes across Europe, and Sherlock is in hot pursuit. When Moriarty threatens Dr. Watson, played by Jude Law, and his new wife, Sherlock must keep them safe while trying to foil Moriarty's plot to start a massive European war. Once again, Holmes and Watson sparkle on screen, and the actors' relationship holds it all together. Holmes is still smart, but is much more a man of action in these films. That's not to say that the film isn't also funny. There's plenty of wit on display to offset the explosions. Downey Jr. looks like he's having a lot of fun with the character, and I really do hope that there would be further Holmes movies, although there has been a period of time now since this one, as he's been busy with Iron Man. Strangely, they chose to take elements from the final solution, which is the final Holmes story, although they at least chose to definitively keep the door open at the end of the film. Our other adaptations have had the "is he dead" question hanging over the story, so it was a nice change to have that answered before the end of the film. The story moves along briskly. It never becomes boring. Other side characters introduce some variety and colour, but I'm not sure I needed to see nude Mycroft. Stephen Fry is great fun as Mycroft, but the nude breakfast sequence was baffling. I'm assuming it was played just for laughs, but it's just quite strange that a Victorian gentleman, especially one that would work for the government in, I guess, a spy or sort of an intelligence capacity, would behave in such a way. The effects do a great job on portraying the late Victorian era, and the costuming, etc. is very impressive. It's always amazing the amount of effort that goes into period pieces, and this is no exception. Although you will not find Holmes in sort of tweed and deerstalker, he's much more scruffy casual in this, when he's not slipping into some kind of disguise and disappearing into the background with the furniture. Overall, it's a fun time. I definitely like another of these Sherlock Holmes movies. RDJ has recently announced he's working on a Sherlock series, so hopefully that will be in this universe, and that would be really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. So check out this movie if you haven't already seen it, and hopefully you'll get hyped for the upcoming series as well. Okay, finally is Windfall. It's a film from 2022. It stars Lily Collins, Jason Segel, and Jesse Plemons, and it's showing on Netflix. So this is a wealthy CEO, Jesse Plemons, and his wife, played by Lily Collins. They arrive at their vacation home to discover someone, played by Jason Segel, in the middle of robbing it. They initially try to appease the robber with some money from the house, and he locks them up and leaves, but he returns a short time later and wants more money, and the CEO tells him it will take him till the next day to get it. So these three people are thrown together in a confined space for, I guess, a period of time, and we start to learn a little bit about each of the people and their motivations. When an accident occurs, it changes the situation drastically. Jason Segel pitched the story for this film 2 months into the COVID pandemic, figuring it was a story that could be told in a limited location using a very small group of people. You learn a little bit about the characters, but never anything in depth. They don't even have names. The credits referring to them as CEO, wife, and nobody. Clearly none of them are really very happy with their situation though, even though they've brought it on themselves to a degree. Throwing money into the mix and the manipulations start to come out, and it's inferred that perhaps nobody was someone who was put out of work by a CEO, but it's never definitively stated that's the case. They're all sort of ciphers, and I wondered if it's less about the people and more of a commentary on the haves versus the have-nots and sort of their attitudes to each other. The movie is okay, but it's kind of a slow burn. It's trying to be suspenseful Hitchcockian style movie, but there isn't necessarily, I felt, enough happening in its runtime of an hour and a half. It could possibly have been edited down a bit tighter. It seems to be a common issue with some of the pandemic films. You know, bearing in mind that they have, you know, limited resources, limited capacity and things like that, and trying to fill out sort of a standard runtime, I think sometimes is just a bit difficult for someone. It picks up towards the end of the film though, after the accident, and it becomes clear to a character that they can change their situation and blame it on another party. It's a bit of a surprising twist. I wasn't necessarily expecting it to go out this way. Things do suddenly get kind of a bit murderous all of a sudden. But perhaps it was never really going to end well anyway. If you don't mind your thrillers a bit slow, then maybe check it out. I don't think I'd give it a repeat watch, but it's not the worst thing I've seen lately, and right now its content is a bit thin on the ground. It's that's not a terrible thing really, so maybe give it a look. Okay, so those are my suggestions for this week. I hope they are of some help to you and of some interest. As always, if you have any comments, please leave them below. Let me know what you think. If you've watched any of them, did you enjoy them? Do you have any suggestions for things to watch? I would be open to some suggestions. As always, please do click on the like and subscribe so you get contacted when the next reviews come out. And on screen is my Twitter link. If you want to follow on there, I tweet at things that I'm watching while I'm watching them. So if you want to jump on and tweet at me and we can tweet about things, feel free. As always, I hope you're all well, I hope you're safe, and enjoy some movies and TV, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye now.